Hi everyone, I'm James. Welcome to the Nostalgia Talk bonus. Hope you guys had a great holiday season and that 2023 is off to a good start for you. I actually do have some sad news. If you're a fan of the Muppets and Sesame Street, then you probably already know that a couple weeks ago we lost the one and only Bob McGrath, who played Bob Johnson on Sesame Street. Bob was one of the very first ever original human cast members from Sesame Street. And he was on the very first ever episode, and we all remember him for many different things on the show. So I thought I'd look back on some of my favorite Bob moments, and also some of my favorite Bob McGrath moments. So I'll start with Bob as a singer. You know, we all remember Who Are the People in Our Neighborhood, which was of course Bob's signature song, where he would go around and talk to various Muppets about their job. They're actually one of my very favorite People in Your Neighborhood segments was with Linda, actually. And for those of you who don't know, Linda was a human character on Sesame Street played by an actress named Linda Bove, who was deaf, and so the character Linda was actually deaf. And Bob and Linda were very, very close, and Bob spoke sign language alongside of Linda. So they meet two of the people in our neighborhood, an elevator operator and a pharmacist. And all of the People in Your Neighborhood segments usually had a joke to go alongside of whatever the character's job was. So for an elevator operator, Bob says, "How's the job?" And the elevator operator, who is played by Frank Oz, says, "Oh, it has its ups and downs." I've heard that joke many times from people who work as elevator operators. And Bob's like, "I should have known better than to ask, just sing." And usually the Muppets knew the lyrics right away, like, I can take you up from floor to floor, or I'm having a bit of a hard time remembering some of these lyrics, but like, "'Cause an elevator operator is a person in your neighborhood," and Linda's actually signing the lyrics. In your neighborhood. Oh, an elevator operator is kind of fast to say in a song like Who Are the People in Your Neighborhood, so Linda's like, screw it. And just gives up and is like, "I'm just gonna let Bob sing." Next up is a pharmacist. The pharmacist was played by Jerry Nelson, and Bob says, "Hey, I've seen you in the drugstore." And she says, "Yes, I'm a pharmacist." And Bob says, "Would they call you a pastel packin' mama?" And the pharmacist looks at Bob like, "Screw off and shut up." And Bob's like, all right, sorry. Another one of my favorite Who Are the People in Your Neighborhood segments was from a Sesame Street TV special that had a lot of celebrities in it. And so they had celebrities talking about what they do. For example, Martina, I have a hard time saying this, Martina Navratilova, anyway, a tennis player, and as usual, there's a joke in that. And I've used this one of my friends before. Bob says to Martina, "You know, tennis is such a noisy game because it's played with a racket." And Bob says to Martina, "You know, I'd like to play tennis myself. Could you give me a good tip?" And Martina says, "Yeah, here's a good tip. Sing the song." The next person that Bob meets is Barbara Walters, who also just passed away a few days ago. I feel like I should mention that. Barbara Walters, the one and only news reporter, interviewer, who's been on CNN, The View, has interviewed so many people. She just passed away not too long ago. And this time she's on Sesame Street interviewing Bob. And so Bob recognizes Barbara, not right away. He's like, "Hey, I've seen you on TV. You do the news." And so he starts singing about Barbara's job, and then she says, "We want to know about you and Linda," trying to get some gossip on Bob and Linda. And she says, "Are you making plans?" And Bob says, "Well, you know what? We actually are making plans. So tomorrow, we're going to go for a walk in the park. And then after that, we're going to go to her place to play checkers. And those are our plans." That's not really what Barbara meant, but she didn't really specify the question. So Barbara Walters signs off by saying, "I'm Barbara Walters, and that's the news." And Bob's like, "Yes, that's who you are, Barbara Walters. Yes, of course. You're terrific." So they sing the song together, and then Bob meets another person, Ralph Nader, the presidential candidate, or yeah, he ran for president years ago, but is well known as a consumer advocate. And he is checking wheels on a wagon. And Bob says, "Yes, you're a consumer advocate. Aren't you the person with the great memory?" Ralph's like, "What does that have to do with anything?" And Bob's like, "Aren't you the guy with Total Recall?" Ralph says, "I'd like to recall that joke." And Ralph says to Bob, I really, really like your sweater. Bob wore a lot of cool sweaters on Sesame Street. This one in particular I felt made him look a lot like Mr. Rogers. And I was actually thinking just right before I started recording this, Bob was like Sesame Street's version of Mr. Rogers. I'll talk a little bit more about that as I continue. But Bob says, yes, my aunt made it for me. And Ralph says, has it been tested to see if it's made properly? A shirt? Really? Anyway, so he checks the shirt and kind of rips it. And Bob starts singing, a consumer advocate's a person in your neighborhood. And he says, that's a mouthful. So's elevator operator. An elevator operator's a person. That's a lot harder to say in that melody than consumer advocate. But it definitely does teach people what people do. It's like, you'll see, when I'm out on walks, like, I see people, you know, doing their jobs all the time, whether they're on a telephone wire or I live near a grocery store, so if I'm walking by the grocery store and they're putting carts away, you know, I actually worked at that grocery store for a bit, so a bagger, that's what the title was. A bagger is a person in your neighborhood, in your neighborhood, in your neighborhood. Yes, a bagger is a person in your neighborhood. A person who you meet each day. Even people, if they're just kind of doing their own thing, they're still a person that you meet each day. Talking about jokes when it comes to Bob, there was one episode where there was one character on Sesame Street, Sam the Robot, who is a rather obscure character that I have talked about before that I don't know if some of you guys would remember, but there was one episode where Grover sees Sam and it actually scares the crap out of him. And so Bob's like, no, you don't need to be scared. This is Sam. Like, just so nice the whole time. And it's like, well, why don't I show you how Sam works, and then maybe you won't be afraid of him. You might really like him. So he shows him, like, Sam had a lot of machines attached to him, like, what was there? Some kind of smokestack or a computer, propeller, a faucet, and a telephone, and a little arrow. Sam goes, and this is a Bob pointing at a telephone. And so Bob's like, let me make a call. I've used this joke at work so many times, so I apologize in advance if any of my coworkers are watching this. So he picks up the phone and he says, hello? Oh, you don't say. And he's just smiling and laughing as he keeps saying, you don't say. You don't say, and then hangs up. Grover's like, who is that? Bob says, he didn't say. That joke is so classic, but so old. Anyway, so yeah, Bob went out of his way to make sure that Grover was alright, and made him less afraid. And Grover's like, I'm not afraid of you anymore, Sam. Sam's like, well, thank you, Grover. You're a very nice person. Oh no, I am not a person, I am a monster. So his computer's researching what a monster is, and he goes, ah, a monster is a horrible thing. I think my very, very favorite song that Bob did on Sesame Street is, not The People in Your Neighborhood. I do like that one a lot, but my very favorite song that Bob ever did on Sesame Street is one called Hi Friend. He did it a couple of times on the show, but my very favorite one, my very favorite performance of that song on the show is when he's doing it, and the Martians kind of sneak up behind him. Bob looks, and the Martians just kind of disappear. Eventually, the Martians join Bob in the song. Bob's like, hi, friend, how are you, friend? Have you got some time to spend with me today? And there's the Martians, la 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 la, and the Martians go, wah 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 wah. And as the Martians get a little bit more comfortable with being around Bob, Bob gives them candy. It's really nice. Actually, now that I think about it, I do remember there was one episode where Bob was on his way to Hooper's store, and there was a guy there with an ice cream machine who was trying to sell ice cream on Sesame Street in like this vending machine. And Bob says to the guy, yeah, I'm just going down to Hooper's store to get some ice cream. Do you want to join me? He's never met him, but offers to buy him ice cream. That's really, really nice. That shows the kind of nice guy that Bob was. And Bob McGrath, I knew him a little bit. I wouldn't say we were exactly close. I didn't know him too well, but we did communicate on Facebook. And he really was a nice guy. I remember one time he posted a picture of him and his grandson around Christmas time one year decorating a Christmas tree, and I left a comment. I said, that is a really, really nice picture. You two look very nice together. And he liked it. And later on, he says, I'm sorry that I haven't been able to respond to all the comments. We got COVID, and so I left a comment there, and I said, oh, well, I hope you're feeling better. And he liked that too. It just goes to show that Bob McGrath was a very, very nice guy. I noticed in a lot of the early episodes from Sesame Street that Bob usually was a victim of Oscar's pranks. There was an episode where it was snowing on Sesame Street, and Oscar really didn't like the snow, and he's like, well, you know what, I put some of it in a bucket. And Bob says, well, Oscar, I thought you didn't like it. I don't, but I got some mud from the mud man here, I'll just put that right in the snow, and got some soot from the chimney. Oscar's trash can has a chimney? Or did he go to the top of 123 Sesame Street to get the chimney soot? Anyway, I guess it doesn't really matter. So he puts all of it into the bucket of snow, and Bob's like, Oscar, that's terrible. You shouldn't do that with the snow. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna throw it right into the street. Oh, no, please don't do that. Don't throw it out into the street like that. Clearly, Oscar's so worried. And Bob's like, there, I threw it right into the street. Right where the trucks come? Good, that's what I wanted you to do, because there comes a truck right now. And Bob gets sprayed by the snow. And, I mean, Bob never really got angry, but he would look at Oscar like, oh God, of course you wanted me to do that. I remember one episode, Bob gets a call at Hooper's store, and he's like, oh God, I gotta tell Oscar. And so you don't hear the whole conversation, but he goes to Oscar, and it's like, hey Oscar, guess what? What do you mean, guess what? What is this, a quiz show? Well, I just got a call from somebody who said her name was Granny Grouch, and she's on her way to Sesame Street right now to come and see you. Granny Grouch is coming here? And you know how smart alecky Oscar could be sometimes. So Bob says, is she really your grandmother? And Oscar, you know, tries to fool Bob again. No, she's my Uncle George. Of course she's my grandmother. What do you think she calls herself Granny for? So Oscar tells Bob a little bit about his family life, and Bob's like, well, you know what? I'd love to meet Granny Grouch. Just so happens that Granny Grouch arrives, and, you know, kisses Oscar. Oscar's like, I hate to be kissed, and I especially hate your warm, juicy kisses. Oh, all my grandchildren hate my kisses, so I kiss them every chance I get. We all have a relative like that that's just all about those kisses. For Oscar, it's Granny Grouch. So Granny Grouch sees Bob and says, who is this nice young man? Oh, that's Bob. You'll like him. He's a pretty rotten guy. And so as Bob leaves, he says, it's been nice meeting you, Granny. I mean, it's been rotten meeting you, Granny, which is a Grouch version of a compliment. Well, at least Bob kind of knew how to compliment somebody in a Grouch way. Shows that he did kind of have a bit of a closeness with Oscar, being around a Grouch. He knew how Grouches spoke. Going back to Bob as a singer, as a lot of you probably know, not only did Bob pass away this year, but we also lost another one of my very favorite people from Sesame Street, Emilio Delgado, who played Luis. And of course, I did a video tribute like this to Emilio, so I decided to do one for Bob as well. And when I think of the two of them together, I always think of the song I Wanna Say Welcome, Welcome to the Party, which, Bob sang in English, and Luis translated it in Spanish. And sometimes I use that song if friends or family members come here to visit. I often say, I want to say welcome, welcome to the province. You know, kind of parodying that song. It really is one of my very favorite Sesame Street songs, and it sounds very, very welcoming. Especially with Bob, like, because he was... A lot of episodes of Sesame Street, especially in the early years, he'd be like, hi, how are you? Welcome to Sesame Street. In the very first episode, actually, this one just came to mind. In the first episode, we meet Bob for the first time, as well as some of the other humans, like Gordon, Susan, Mr. Hooper, and I remember Gordon's showing this little girl who moved to Sesame Street around the neighborhood, and she says, this is Bob. Hi, Bob. And Bob's like, oh, hi, Gordon. How are you today? One of my very favorite stories that I've ever heard from Bob McGrath actually was a Jim Henson story. And it was in a skit where Kermit was doing a lecture about frogs, and then Bob comes in to help with an actual frog. And it looks nothing like Kermit. Kermit's like, what is that? Bob's like, oh, it's an American bullfrog, you know? He's got 2 legs, And he's got two bulgy but beautiful eyes. Well, they're bulgy anyhow. Yeah, and you said frogs are green in color. A few brown spots on there. Yeah, and he's got a face that would stop a clock. And Bob says, well, Kermit, why don't you tell everyone, why don't you tell everyone where frogs live? And Kermit's more interested in talking about where he lives as a frog, in a house. Real frogs don't live in houses. So what do frogs like to eat? Fried chicken and pizza. And frogs like me like French fries, and it's hard to beat pancakes. And Bob says, well, I know you love that stuff, but this kind of frog would prefer, like, flies and spiders. And I once heard Bob tell the story that, as they're doing that skit, he's got Jim Henson is right here doing Kermit. Here's where Bob is, and the frog is just right above Jim and starts peeing on him, and Jim just kept right on going. I'm sure everyone was cracking up, but Jim did not care. He just went right on going. You can actually tell that Jim was a little bit weirded out, because I noticed that as Kermit was getting grossed out about what frogs eat, it's like, oh, they like bugs and worms and spiders. Spiders! So that was either Kermit grossed out or Jim grossed out. It's hard to tell. Last year, I actually watched a few of the Sesame Street Muppet and Human cast at a live stream, and Bob was one of them. And one of the funniest things that happened was the host asked Frank Oz. Frank Oz was there too. There was Bob McGrath, Roscoe Orman, who plays Gordon, Allison Bartlett, who played Gina, and Muppet performers Kevin Clash. I did meet Kevin that day. Steve Whitmire, our good friend Fran Brill, and Frank Oz. And the host says to Frank Oz, is it true that Jim asked you about doing the Big Bird character? And Frank goes, oh yeah, but there was no way. Right away, Frank just realizes what he just said, and everyone dies laughing. And he goes, I was so good. And Bob's like, how good? Really good? And everyone is dying laughing, including me. I'm like, oh my god, I never thought that not just Bob, that any of them would say that. The other thing that I think of when it comes to Bob, and especially with the Muppets, is Bob as a storyteller. Because in the early seasons of Sesame Street, there were moments where Bob would read stories that the Muppets would act out. One of my very favorites, and sometimes the Muppets would actually go to Bob for advice. There was one, The Monster's 3 Wishes, where Cookie Monster made a genie come out of a tube of toothpaste, and the genie says, I'm gonna give you 3 wishes. And so, me want to wish for 1,000,000 cookies, but me need something to put cookies in. So, first wish is a truck, a toy truck that looks like it came out of a cereal box. And then he says to Bob, me need to wish for something else. How about bigger truck? Bob's like, you're gonna wish for a bigger truck? Okay. Still a toy truck. Me going to wish for biggest truck of all! And Cookie leaves just as Bob is about to say, you're using up your 3 wishes, that's your last wish. But he's like, whatever. And doesn't even bother to tell him. He's like, wait a minute, that's... And then he's like, oh, okay. So yeah, Cookie Monster will figure it out for himself. The other one that I always get a kick out of is, it's called The Magic Apple, where Ernie plays a farm boy who wants to live in a palace, something like that, yeah. Wants to live in a palace, and a fairy godmother says, if that apple falls down, that apple on that tree is a magic apple, when that falls, you get your wish. And when the fairy godmother says to Ernie, I'll grant you a wish, Ernie goes to Bob and says, I can't decide whether or not to wish for a banana milkshake or a rubber ducky. Bob's like, Ernie, you're supposed to wish to live in a palace and get married to a princess. And Ernie's like, well, are there rubber duckies and milkshakes in the palace? Bob's like, well, I guess so. Hey, you could wish for that too. To live in a palace and marry a princess and share rubber duckies and banana milkshakes. And the reason I really like that skit is because it shows the performers' connection with each other. You've got Bob McGrath telling the story, Jim Henson doing Ernie as the farm boy, Fran Brill doing the fairy godmother, Carol Spinney does a farmer who offers to help Ernie get the apple, but doesn't work, Jerry Nelson plays a king who grants Ernie the wish, and Bert, who's played by Frank Oz, does the Princess Gwendolinda, much to his embarrassment. He has to dress up in a drag. Why do I always have to be the princess? Well, we couldn't find anybody else to play the part, Bert. going back to the human cast, and especially Luis, I'm thinking about this right now, Bob and Luis doing Sing. That happened quite a few times, where Bob would sing the English lyrics of the song, sing, sing a song, sing out loud, and Luis would play guitar and translate it in Spanish. You know, I remember saying this to Lou Berger. I did talk to Lou Berger about Bob, actually, like when he passed away, because Lou loved Bob. I mean, how could you not? Bob was such a nice guy. And I remember Lou saying on Nostalgia Talk when Bob was doing Triangle Bob, Triangle Pants, that Bob was one of the great sports of Sesame Street. But anyway, so, yeah, Sing, as I was saying to Lou, it's the national anthem for Sesame Street. Don't worry if it's not good enough for anyone else to hear. Just sing a song. This one came to mind, actually, when I heard that Bob passed away. And it was in the episode where, the human cast told Big Bird that Mr. Hooper died. I'm sure many of you big Sesame Street fans know the episode very, very well. And so they're having a hard time explaining to Big Bird that Mr. Hooper died, and Big Bird is upset, understandably very sad by the news. You know, they just explain, Mr. Hooper died, he's not coming back. And that was a really good way to say it, honestly. And so Big Bird says, it won't be the same. And Bob goes right to Big Bird, and when I heard Bob passed away, this line came right into my head. Bob says to Big Bird, you're right, it'll never be the same without him. But we can all be very lucky that we had the chance to be with him, and to know him, and to love him a lot when he was here. And that's why I'm doing this video, to talk about my memories of Bob, and maybe even some of your memories. I think I'll finish with this one. You know, there's a lot of good Bob stuff out there from the last, like, 50 years that he's done Sesame Street. Yeah, one that I just thought of this one. Follow That Bird, the one of the Sesame Street movies. When Big Bird is trying to find his way back to Sesame Street, Bob is the one who puts the plan together for all the Muppets and humans to meet up with Big Bird somewhere. And that really shows how much they care about Big Bird. They're traveling across the country to look for him, and Bob is the one who puts it together. He says, we're here, Big Bird is here, this is what we're going to do, phone here if you haven't found him. So yeah, definitely shows how much, not just Bob, but they all care about Big Bird. To finish, a lot of you big Sesame Street lovers probably remember that back in the day, all the human cast just assumed that Snuffleupagus was Big Bird's imaginary friend. There was an episode where finally Gordon, Maria, and Linda start to believe that Snuffleupagus is real, because Big Bird says, I'm tired of hearing the imaginary friend thing. I've been alive 6 years, and I know the difference between what's real and what's imaginary. And then Gordon says, I believe you, Big Bird. I think you do know the difference. And Maria agrees, and Bob signs to Linda, they believe that the Snuffleupagus is real. And Linda signs that she believes too. Big Bird's like, what about you, Bob? Bob's like, well, I want to believe you, but I've never seen a Snuffleupagus. And Big Bird says, well, Bob, I've never seen your aunt in Ottawa. I believe she's real. Finally, when all the adults see Snuffy for the first time, Bob says, you know what, Big Bird, from now on, we'll believe you whenever you tell us something. Oh, I know I said I was done with that one, but actually I just thought of this one, and then I'll wrap it up. With the Snuffleupagus thing, actually. So there was an episode where Snuffy ran alongside of Gordon in the New York City Marathon, and Snuffy was behind everyone, like was hours late to the race, and was behind everyone. And so Forgetful Jones sees Snuffy on the street, and after Snuffy leaves, Big Bird says to Forgetful, there's Bob, tell him what you saw. And Big Bird's trying to get Forgetful to remember, and Bob's like, yeah, Snuffleupagus, it's not real. And Big Bird's like, Forgetful, don't you remember? And Forgetful's like, I don't, but you remember all that? You must have some good memory, eh, there? Bob's like, well, I think he has a good imagination. Big Bird's like, he's real! He's real! And Big Bird takes off, and Forgetful says, who's that big yellow guy? Bob says, forget it. I think I'll finish with this. Bob was a great guy. Bob on Sesame Street. Bob as a person. He was a great guy. And I'll definitely miss him. Again, I didn't hear from him much, but when I did, I always saw that was my favorite thing about him, was his generosity as his character and as a person. He was very nice. And if any of you big Sesame Street fans out there knew Bob and you have any memories of him, let me know in the comments. I want to hear them. And if you have any favorite memories of Bob from Sesame Street, his character, I'll read those too if you comment below. So to finish, I made a little slideshow in tribute to Bob with pictures of him on Sesame Street. Some of those pictures are from some of the moments that I talked about. So I hope you guys enjoy. And I will see you soon. Peace.